like I did with the drum heads.
All right, quick
Just to make you
question.
laugh.
We are
Quick
back.
question.
Sean doesn't know. He doesn't care. He
Oh,
doesn't
what, we're
respect
back?
me. We are back. And quick question is a segment that was developed from our day-to-day operations downstairs.
All right.
People come in, hey, quick question for you. And it's always like the guy you spent an hour or 2 hours with, you know?
Right,
It's like,
right.
Oh, quick question. Like as if they're going to be like, what are your hours today? No, it's never that. That's not ever the
Right.
quick question. The quick question is like, hey, do you sell drumsticks? No, it's like, it's always just like, well, what about this? And what about that? And that leads to this and that and that. And then you spend time with them. But we love it. This is long form format, so we can really dive into stuff. And today we're talking about something. I'm curious to see your opinion on this.
Sure.
Because Sean and I are about to get real nerdy. You might just be like, guys, it doesn't matter, which is a proper answer. Quick question. How do you recommend mounting my rack tom? Sidebar. I have a rack tom with this mount. How do I mount it? Sidebar. How do you feel about a bass drum mount drilled in your bass drum? Sidebar. Mounting off a cymbal stand. Sidebar. Blah, 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 blah. Snare drum basket.
Sidebar, different tom mounts, because someone could come in and say,
Correct.
how do I mount my tom? And you go, oh, what kind of drum set do you have? Because Pearl tom mounts are different than,
Yes.
Right.
Gretsch, are different than, Gibraltar, or different than whatever else. So, you have to take all of that into consideration. But again, are you using a rack? Do you have a mount on the bass drum? Yes or no? Do you want to mount? Do you have a boom cymbal stand over here? You can mount it off the boom cymbal stand. You could simply put it in a snare basket like Adam's doing right now. So there's a lot of different ways you can mount a rack tom. So yeah, it's not a quick answer. It is a quick question,
right.
But it doesn't.
There's definitely a lot of qualifying, as Sean says.
Qualifying.
Where you have to figure out what they have. A lot of times when people ask that question, if they literally ask it like the first time I asked it here, it's because they're like piecing together a kit. They've got
Yes.
one bass drum that's this maker model
Yeah.
and one rack tom that's this maker model. And I will say that the top three most common ways that you mount a rack tom are going to be coming out of a bass drum on a bass drum mount, off of a cymbal stand, or in a snare basket. And I am a huge fan of bass drum mount. Simplicity. Keep it as simple as possible. And I promise you, everyone that's putting muffled heads on the front and the back of their bass drum and sticking a pillow in there and a blanket in there, the little 4 screws that go in your bass drum are not affecting your sound. Cut it out.
Yes.
This whole virgin bass drum thing, cut it
Yes.
out. I'm sick of it.
Yeah.
I'm sick of it. I'm going off the rails here.
It's very annoying.
You got to calm me
But
down
yeah,
over here.
That's okay.
Because-
I'll calm down, Adam.
Hey,
Calm
chill
down.
out, chill
Calm
out.
down.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell you
I
that-
agree. I agree with you.
that whole argument, they're typically the same people that will justify the hanging floor tom, which also drives me nuts. Not saying that there isn't anything to that. Of course, if you scientifically check the sound waves, they're going to be a different pattern because there's a screw sticking down. But do you hear it? Is it detectable live? Is it detectable recording? Blah, blah, blah. No. It's not a difference that I can hear. We're all drummers. We all didn't start using hearing protection. We can't hear the difference. No one else cares anyway.
And once you
Mount
put
on
it,
the bass drum
and
right
guess
there.
what? Once you mount a SM57 on that rack tom,
Yeah. You've thrown the whole thing out of bounds anyway.
you're good
Something
to go.
else to rattle.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that, but this is gonna project your
Right.
tom sound.
Exactly.
So,
it's projecting that tom
yeah.
sound. So that's one way. That's my favorite way. A second way is off of boom stands via clamp. That drives me nuts. I hate it. I hate having to set things up. I hate having to deal with like 4,000 different weird memory locks, and it's never quite right. And you're playing and you're adjusting it at the show, and the cymbal moves a little bit, and the cymbal's a little off. I hate fuss. I'm trying to eliminate as much fuss as possible with my setup at all times.
And
I
now
hate fuss.
You picked up a new drum set.
I
just
picked up a
recently.
new drum set. I picked up a Pearl Masters kit here that came in gold sparkle, and it's a beautiful drum set, but it didn't have a mount on the bass drum, and I haven't gotten really around to it. And I totally shot down anyone who would want to put a rack tom and a snare stand for years, because I just remember not my first experience, but one of my most typical experiences working at a drum shop is especially when I started back in like 2014. Pearl came out with Pearl Roadshow entry-level drum set. One of the popular configurations was 1 up, 2 down.
Right.
Now, what did they do? They saved money. They didn't put anything in the bass drum, and they just gave you a second snare stand.
Right.
And that rack tom sounded like garbage.
That's right.
And it absolutely had to do with the stand. The rubber was awful that it was sitting on. It was like nothing. It was almost metal on metal. The hoops were gnarly and bent. the drums didn't come with good heads, especially. That's a huge thing. The
they're
resonant
not-
heads were like crinkly. It was
And also,
rough.
they're
Oh,
not really
jeez.
like high quality drums to begin with.
They're not high quality drums, but really it was the perfect storm of like you tune this thing up, hold it in your hand, it would sound okay, and you put it on and it would just go puh. It would just you hit it, it just went puh, and it was just so sad and like hard to sell from our perspective. It's like you hit the drum and it literally sounded bad. The non-drummers were like, "Is that
Or
supposed to sound that way?"
guess what? Quick question. What's the first question someone asks when they come in? Because that's an entry level drum set.
Correct.
They're coming in and looking at the set, 1 up, 2 down, which we all know and love. But when you're first starting out, your first question is, can I mount another drum off?
Yeah,
of
how
it?
do I get the other drum?
Yeah, and
the
then
other drum.
now you're shooting yourself in the foot in a sense.
Yeah,
you
'cause
know?
you're selling that-
'Cause there's no
that
mount on the bass
system.
drum. So now, are you going to put another snare basket over there? No, you're not going to do that. Now you have to mount them either off a rack or 2 cymbal stands, and now you're getting a whole other ball game. And
Right.
you might as well just forget that set and go sell another one.
Bold play to sell an entry level drum set like that. 1 up, 2
that
down.
is right,
Bold
yeah.
play. I thought it looked great, but unfortunately,
look
it sounded
kinda
like.
cool.
So anyway, that was really the most drums I experienced, and I was like, I'm never doing that. You know, why would I ever do that? Now, this Pearl kit comes, doesn't have a mount. I got to get it going for the gig. So I'm just like, grab. Tama makes an awesome, smaller snare basket. You know, lightweight Rode Pro
For piccolo.
for 10 or 12 inch drums. I'm like, perfect. Snag one of those. That becomes my stand for my rack tom. Now, this is a really nice drum set. It's got die-cast hoops. The stand is nice. It's got like some isolation built into it. I put that thing on. It sounds like $1 million, and I've been playing it like that ever since.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So coming from my perspective, I was like, forget that. But this kit came in used. It was like this. I needed it for the gig. I went out,
But
and guess
also-
what? It works.
Yeah.
It
You're
works.
doing it as a matter of convenience too. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you had a mount on your bass drum, you would be definitely using that, right?
Yes.
But since you don't, it's like, okay, what's the next best option? Mounting it off a cymbal stand? Nah, not so much. It's
always my last
Now
option.
you're fussing with it. So coming up with the snare basket is the next logical solution. Other than drilling that shell out and putting a mount on there, I would do the same thing. I would put it in a snare basket. I only play 1 rack tom. You're playing 2 rack toms with no mount on the bass drum. Now you're dealing with something else. You're going to want either a front bar rack or you're going to want 2 mounts off, independent cymbal
Sure.
stands.
Sure. And before we bring
What's
Corey
your
in on
thought
this,
on this?
hang on. Before we bring him on,
Sit here.
he doesn't play drum set. Hang on. Before I bring him in,
He doesn't play
I want to
drum
play
set.
one
Shut
more
up.
thing. I want to say one more thing. I also love lightweight vintage hardware. Not necessarily actually vintage. Like I play the Pearl stuff that looks vintage. I love that. So I ain't mounting anything on that.
That's
my
right.
my cymbal tips a little bit like Ringo, and I love it.
Okay.
So I don't want to mount anything off of that. So I can't. Right.
Yeah.
So now, even though you're not a drum set player, not here gigging drum set, I will say you've seen a million bands, and
Sure.
everyone has a strong aesthetic opinion about the drums. I hope, or else we're wasting all of our time.
I'm going home.
When you see, like, say you see like a 4-piece kit or a 5-piece kit or whatever you see with a rack tom, what do you like the look of?
So I sometimes I rarely play drum set, and whenever I do play, I like the bass mount. That's fun. For looks and aesthetics, I'm assuming the rack is that thing that has the bar around. Yeah, that's what I want to see. I like that. That looks
You
cool.
like the rack with everything mounted up top?
Yeah, it looks cool.
Yeah, there's something to be said about that, because when you put things on a rack, it's smooth and like
Symmetrical
clean. It's
and-
clean on the
Yep.
floor. You don't get the mounts on all over the floor. Now, if you're playing a minimal setup like me or even Adam, you're playing maybe 1 crash and 1 ride cymbal tops, and especially when you're playing flat bass cymbal stands, it really is kind of a clean, symmetrical look.
Yes.
It's like really smooth looking and less cluttered. So,
But yeah, you start to add up. You've got 5, 6, 7 cymbals. You
Yeah.
start to add up all those stand tripod bases. The rack does clean some
It
stuff
does
up.
clean it up,
yeah.
and that's what I like about it. Looks cool.
So going back to the mounts and the way you mount things, I've done the same thing that you're doing too, putting the tom tom in the snare basket. One of my first like pro level kits was it was a Ludwig Classic Birch Series drum set. It was a short lived set from the late '90s into the early 2000s. It was a USA kit.
Yeah.
That was
Good deal, too.
really freaking smoking deal. It was a Silver Sparkle kit. It didn't have a mount on the bass drum, but it had a bracket right on the shell of the 13-inch tom tom. So I first started off mounting it off a cymbal stand, And I really
How quickly did you get over that?
very quickly, especially when I started gigging that drum set out. Once I started playing out with the set, I was like, I can't do this. So I started putting it in a snare basket, and I played it
Yeah.
in a snare basket from then on, always. And then I had a 60s vintage Slingerland kit, which I still have. The mount on that is a little kind of goofy too, and it's hard to really
vintage
dial it.
mount,
Yeah, vintage mount.
possibly. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a rail console, so it's like you get it set and you put the tom tom on. It just kind of like moves a little bit, so you have to tweak it up a little bit, and then it moves a little bit. It's kind of weird. So
It's a
I
little
had
fussy,
that.
yeah.
I had that in a snare basket. That tom tom in a snare basket for years too. Now I really dialed it in, and I spent some time on it. So I do use the mount for that at home,
Sure.
and I play that strictly at home.
Yeah, playing the vintage stuff.
Yep. But I've done.
Yep.
I've done it all.
I warned you. We were about to get into it.
That's fine.
These are the
I'm
details
I'm sitting here
that
and
no
just
one talks
listening.
about except for us with everyone. See,
That's fine.
it's all warmed up. Sean's over the moon. He's got 3 Red Bulls in him, and no. But let's move on. We're gonna talk about you now.
Oh,
We're gonna get to his story, Mr. Story. We're getting to his story in Between the Plies.
Woo!